Hello, and welcome to the latest Lakers Theory podcast. I think we're going live. It just jumped up to 25 seconds on the live meter there in the left corner. So I don't actually know if we're live right now or how long we've been live. But I am Shane Jackson. Joined with me, as always, is Austin Case. This is the Lakers Theory podcast. Follow us on all social medias there so you can find out when we go live, even though we don't know when we're going live. And I want to start by apologizing to Lakers fans who are listening to this podcast, who are regular listeners of this podcast. The last time we recorded this show, it was right before the Super Bowl, and I compared the Lakers to the Chiefs. So I will take full responsibility on what has happened since then. So we have recorded since then. The Lakers have played 4 games. They're 3-1 over that stretch. You might think that's not too bad, right? But they needed overtime in 2 of those 3 games, and
3.
All 3 of those games. I think the Grizzlies game wasn't overtime, so
Okay.
So there's nothing flashy about it. And then the loss is where they lost AD, which I think completes the Chiefs analogy. If you want my full opinion, because the Chiefs dealt with injuries. Pat Mahomes got injured in a playoff game, and they played close with teams they shouldn't have played close with. So it sounds like the last 10 days of the Lakers, if you ask me. Austin, any Super Bowl thoughts right now? And my Chiefs metaphor, is it holding up?
I don't know. I like Super Bowl thoughts. I thought that was a good game, but obviously, I was rooting against the Chiefs, so naturally I thought. But it was definitely, I was not expecting that outcome whatsoever. So, but my takeaway from the Super Bowl itself was, like, when your defense plays that bad and your offensive line is practically gone, because I think they were missing both tackles and maybe a guard. So they were shorthanded. So there's a lot of reasonability for them to have that bad of an outing, but it's just bad timing, which I guess plays into the Lakers because it's just bad timing for AD to go out. But yeah. Go ahead.
Speaking of shorthanded, it's the Lakers. Yes, so this all means the Lakers are going to lose to the Nets in the finals. So just book it here. It is whatever episode this is. I don't know what date it is. We're in February sometime. I think we're recording this on February 16th? Is that what day it is?
Yes.
I'm really bad at dates. But so book it. I already told you how the season's going to end. The Lakers are going to lose the Nets because that completes the Chiefs metaphor, losing in the finals. But the short-handed Lakers are going against the Timberwolves tonight. We are not talking about that game because it's in the middle of the game right now, and I don't think there's anything to glean from tonight's game that is worthy of a podcast. I thought we just dive right into the whole AD aspect of this, and they are going to face a brutal stretch coming up, I think, over the next 9 games or 8 or 9 games without, theoretically, AD, because I think he's out until the All-Star break, is what I believe the latest report was. And so I wanted us to attack this from all angles and just really spend the podcast talking about this. I don't know how long it's going to be. I imagine it's going to be relatively short compared to previous podcasts. But that's the biggest news. We don't need to talk about those overtime worthless games or surviving against the Grizzlies or even losing the Nuggets without AD. We don't really need to get into all of that. I think the way to approach this show is to talk about the AD angle of the injury and how the Lakers move forward from here. Austin, your initial reaction to AD getting injured on Sunday, did you expect it to be a lot worse? And what is your big takeaway?
So initially I was worried, just because I saw the replays of him kind of grabbing that Achilles area. And, like, honestly, it was like just a lower calf Achilles spot. And so I was just like, oh, great. Here goes the season. Like, they could scrap and get into the playoffs still. Like, I think they have a good enough team to do that, but they definitely didn't have a good enough team without AD to, even make it to the finals, in my opinion. But, like, Laker Nation got very fortunate that it was just a calf strain. And like, resting him until the All-Star break is, it's a no-brainer choice. Mm-hmm. I personally, I don't think I try to bring him back after the All-Star break, even for, a week or two. Like, I don't know. I feel like he's always getting banged up. And so something like this where it's, it's so close to the Achilles, and like he was already having, Achilles issues in some way, that like it's not worth it to risk, getting the number one seed in the West, with the potential to losing AD for the year and even, into next season possibly. So I, just rest him until he can run up and down the court and not have to favor one of his legs or even have to think about being hurt at all.
Yeah, especially potentially in this postseason where there's possibly limited fans or no fans at all. Like, how much is home court advantage worth? Or even the number one overall seed and all that stuff. I agree. I wouldn't rush him back. It sounds like he was fine. Like, the day of the injury, I think he said was the best he had felt. And so I don't think the Lakers were putting him in harm's way. I think there may have been like some initial complaints about that, but he's missed 5 games before this injury. They had been careful with him, I think, and taking a lot of these rests on the back-to-backs. So I don't think the Lakers will hurry him back. This is why you did all the offseason moves that you did. Like, I don't know if they saw a AD injury necessarily happening, but this is why you did it, is so that you had even in a what should be a weird year with the pandemic and all that stuff, you didn't know what was going on. You didn't know what was going to happen. So having depth was important, I think, this year more than any other year. You still can't replace a guy like AD. I mean, that's just goes without saying. Doesn't matter how deep your roster is. I mean, he's the best player or the second best player on the team. It doesn't matter. So that is going to be difficult, but this is why the Lakers did what they did in the offseason. And you would think, although it's a brutal stretch. I mean, I need to pull up the schedule again, but this stretch is probably one of their tougher, like, long stretches, right, of this season.
So it's the Nets on Thursday.
Yeah.
The Heat on Saturday. Then the Wizards Monday.
Utah, Portland, Golden State, and then even Phoenix and Sacramento, and I think Golden State, or did I already say Golden State? Yeah, I already said Golden State. Phoenix and Sacramento in early March. Yep. So yeah, it's a tough stretch not to have AD. Obviously, I think even with AD, I mean, you're staring at 6-2. I mean, 7-2, whatever that stretch would be. Like, 2 losses in that stretch seems, feasible. And now without AD, I mean, maybe you're scrapping to be 500 or above 500 during that stretch. So obviously a tough stretch. And I don't know. I want to discuss this from the angle of, where do you think the Lakers are hurt the most without AD over these next 9 games? Is it offensively? Is it defensively? Is there a certain aspect of the game that you think the Lakers will miss AD the most?
So I think he's going to be missed the most on the defensive end. Just his presence in the paint is like, if he's the best defensive player on the team, like, you can't fill that gap. If the guy that's playing for him is Kuz, like, Kuz has been really outstanding defensively, but he's not AD. Like, you're not, guys aren't going to be afraid to drive the lane if Kuz is there. Or even, even Marc Gasol, like, guys aren't afraid to go at these guys. And so that's going to really be missed. There's going to be a setback on the offensive end, obviously, but there's workarounds, or they can get by. But on the defensive end, it's going to be very hard to match what AD brought.
Yeah, I only asked because I for the show I looked up the on-off splits on cleaning the glass, and actually the Lakers were better off, or worse, I guess. Was it offensively without him than defensively. Like it was just weird, and I don't know how much of it is sample size or whatever, but it was weird. The numbers actually suggested that the Lakers would miss him the most on the offensive end, even though maybe he's not having the numbers he's supposed to have, just based off the on-off splits of that aspect. But yeah, my initial thought and what my answer would be as well is on the defensive end. I just think that AD dictates that defensive game plan for the Lakers. I mean, the Lakers are number one, and defensive rating in the NBA, and that's a lot because of him. Like teams do not try to attack the rim when they know he's there. And if you look at the numbers, like when it's Marc Gasol or Harrell, they will try to attack closer to the rim more often when they are, the 5 versus AD. And that makes sense. He is, one of the defense player of the year candidates. He's a shot blocking menace. Like that all makes sense. And I just think from an aspect of, the Lakers are able to just kind of dictate how they play on that end of the floor because of AD, and I think actually we often have overrated maybe their numbers on defensive end just because I don't think it's always great perimeter wise. I think AD it deserves a lot of credit for, those numbers that the Lakers boast. And I think that is the reason why they're going to miss him on that end of the floor. Anything else to add from that aspect? I don't want to, before we move on, I want to make sure we cover.
No, I don't think so. We're really going to figure out what kind of team they can put out there without him against these higher profile teams, the Nets, the Heat, the Jazz, and even a little bit the Warriors. So we're really going to find out what this team can do without him over this next 9 games since they're playing tonight without him.
Yeah, so that's where I wanted to go next is, I hate the whole, maybe this is blessing in disguise because that's not true, obviously. I don't want to say that. But, we've talked all year about how the Lakers are tweaking rotations and lineups and all that stuff. And because they're trying to maximize their potential in the postseason. They want to throw out a group there that they've thrown out and they've seen, right? Is there an element to that here? Can they, over the next 9 games, figure out if something works in this bucket, of lineups, whatever rotations without AD? Is there, maybe it's a certain guy stepping up in a way that he hasn't stepped up yet, and maybe it is just a lineup that they would be able to throw out there 2 minutes. Is there something that the Lakers can learn from that? Because I think that, to me, is the most interesting possibility of this maybe 9-game stretch without AD.
Yeah, man. I definitely think that they're going to figure something out. Even for playoffs, because I mean, if you look at all these teams, they're going to see, they could see some of these teams in the playoffs. So if they have a lineup that doesn't include AD, where they can, outperform these guys in even stretches of the game to maybe where it just comes down to a few possessions where it's just mental errors where they can clean up. But if there's something that they can figure out here where, the AD less lineup. So I really think that they'll be able to figure something out and it will be very beneficial come playoff time.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure what the specific possibility is. And I know you don't want to count on this world without AD because the Lakers aren't winning a title without him, right? But I think there is an avenue for that, right? With over the stretch, there's a possibility the Lakers learn something over that stretch. I think one thing that immediately came to mind for me was maybe Marc Gasol becomes higher usage offensively. Maybe they figure out ways to use him more in the high post area. Just because by default, it all can't fall on LeBron's shoulders, right? And so I think maybe, it's not even lineups when you're talking about that. You're just talking about ways that you can incorporate the best of Marc Gasol that maybe we haven't seen yet. And so that's one that immediately came to my mind. I don't know if it's actually going to happen by any means, but it's one way I could see this Lakers maybe learning from this. And I don't know. Do you have a similar thought? Is there a player or two that you think, hey, in this role without AD, I expect them to do this or have a bigger role?
Yeah, so I really think Harrell will should have a bigger role. Like, he's already getting, he already has a large role, but like I really want to see how he can perform, like knowing that AD's not there. Like he came off the bench tonight, so like that's not a surprise, but like I really want to
start. I didn't see the starting lineup.
Kuz was starting in AD's spot.
Mm-hmm.
So like Harrell, I would like to see just more defensively from him.
Yeah.
I really want to see Kuz kind of like step up.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we've seen that a little bit in the past where like when he gets a start for some reason where like he just kind of plays a little better. But then like you kind of said it, like Gasol, like I would just love to see him be more involved a little bit, just kind of to like unlock that younger version of him that used to be there.
Yeah, the Kuzma one is interesting. So I think I looked up the game logs, but the 5 games without AD, I think it was Kuzma started 3 of them and Markieff Morris started 2, I believe. I think that's how it went. And so I don't know if it was lineup based. I can't remember the opponent who, Morris was starting it versus Kuzma. So I don't know if it was opponent based, and maybe there's some mix and matching there. And maybe that's what the Lakers do moving forward. I don't know. But the Kuzma one is interesting to me because, we've been very high on the way he's played, just kind of embraced this unique role where, hey, he's just going to do whatever it is for the team. Almost Alex Caruso-esque, right? Like he's just going to do whatever it is. And that's been in the form of rebounding as of late. Like he's been rebounding the ball really well. But now he's going from a guy who has kind of a defined role as a role player to, I think there's a chance he's second or third in shots now with the Lakers, and second or third in minutes. So he's going to have to embrace a bigger role, and we'll see what he does with it after really, thriving in the kind of minimal role that he had. So, any other players aspect of this from the life without AD that we didn't discuss? I have one more, so I just didn't know.
No, go ahead.
LeBron. So I don't think, we kind of, discussed the MVP battle, right? The race so far. And I don't necessarily believe, hey, someone can lock up the MVP in February or March, whatever it is, right? But if there was a way of doing that, LeBron over the stretch could do that, right? Like if he goes superhuman and just carries the Lakers to, so it is 9 games, right? We've discussed that. I've been saying 9 games, but I don't actually know. Okay. So if he carries them to, 6-3, 7-2, and he is superhuman during that stretch, and you're talking about beating the Nets, beating the Heat, beating other teams in there. I already forgot their names. Warriors, who they lost to. I don't know. I wouldn't say it's locked up by any means, but that is a chance. That is one thing from this that possibly could happen outside of just the Lakers learning a little bit about themselves. It could just be, hey, this is LeBron's show for this stretch, and it was enough to lock up the MVP. So
yeah, I really think, like, I definitely agree. Like, he can kind of, I don't want to say lock it up because that's insane because there's half the season still. But, like, he can really make a case. And I think it starts with these lesser teams like, the Timberwolves tonight. Honestly, that might – or I guess the Kings. And, the Suns are even a good team. But, like, it'll start for some of those, like, lower-grade teams where if they can get the win, like, they have to beat those teams with LeBron or without AD being there. Yeah. And, like, I don't necessarily think they need to beat like the Nets team, or even the Warriors team or the Jazz. Like, but I think he really needs to like be able to dictate those games where, like, if they can't get the win, like, it's just because the Nets have 3 all-star guys. Like, I think KD is questionable to play against the Lakers, but like, don't necessarily have to win these games, but you have to like show up and not go down like 20 points like they have been to, the Thunder and even the Grizzlies. So Like if he can just be there and just like control the game and just just be LeBron James without AD here, like I think it would make his case for MVP like just a lot stronger.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I guess I was looking at it through the lens of, hey, if he beats the good teams and just takes care of business, elsewhere, then he's. I mean, this is a good chance. And you're looking at it from the other way, like, hey, let's take care of the business against the crappy team, and who cares what happens against the good teams? I think that's an interesting way to look at it. And I that's not the way I looked at it initially, but you're right. That makes a lot of sense. I think that about covers it from all things AD. Obviously sucks not to have AD, but I hope he can get right. And when he comes back, the Lakers, that's when they kind of not necessarily flip a complete switch, but like start working their way towards, hey, it's the postseason getting closer. Let's get to our peak form. Whenever AD comes back, that could be the start of it. I'm fine with that. We'll see what happens over this next 9-game stretch. I want to briefly preview the upcoming Nets game and potentially the Heat game. So I think there's a chance that the Lakers Theory podcast will record right after the Nets game. Assuming it's not a terrible game and we just are bummed about the loss, there's a chance that we record at that game because it is a big game. If we don't, it'll be after the Heat game. We will discuss both those games, or we might just do both games. But make sure you're following us on all platforms at Lakers Theory to get heads up on the schedules about that. Austin, preview the upcoming Nets and Heat game. What are you looking forward to, and what do you expect?
I have no idea what to expect for the Nets game. Like, it could be a really good game or it could just be really terrible. And that's just like the Nets' offensive abilities. It's just outstanding. So like it could easily get away from them, but the Lakers are the best defensive team in the league, and AD is a big part of that. So like there is a drop off without him on there, but it's going to be really interesting, and I would love for them to win. And just looking at it right now through ESPN, they are still favored to win.
Wow.
So we'll see about that. But like I just want it to be a good game. Like I want them to compete, and like they still have LeBron James, so like it shouldn't. He's not going to let a game like this get away from him. Obviously things can happen and stuff, but I think out of the Nets and Heat, like that's the biggest game that I'm looking forward to.
For sure. Yeah, I was just gonna say, I'm looking forward to it. I think the last week or so, it's been a lot of, I don't really care for this game. I'm gonna watch the condensed version next day, like type of thing. Like it's, I don't necessarily care about all these games, and then maybe that's kind of conceited of me as maybe we're already spoiled as Lakers fans, but it was just like I don't care. But this is Austin's finals matchup, Lakers Brooklyn Nets here, and then the rematch of last year's finals matchup. So I don't know, this 2-game stretch is exciting, and a chance potentially we could see superhuman LeBron in the next 2 games. So,
yeah, I am looking forward to the Heat game as well. Just like I've found myself not a fan of Tyler Hero. Just because it's that stupid smirk like that he did in the finals. So like just that one play, I'm like, whatever. He's one of my hated players. So so I really want LeBron to like dominate him, like maybe get a poster dunk on him or something like that. But I think that'll be a good game. The Heat aren't a 500 team right now, but it's early, so whatever. But like I feel like that's a game that the Lakers should be able to win without AD.
Nobody holds grudges like Austin does. That's all I know. And I do know that the Lakers are basically the Chiefs. I will remain in belief in that. And so when they lose to the Nets in the finals, you have me to blame for that as well. I think that's going to do it for this episode of the Lakers Theory podcast. We covered everything AD while the Lakers T-Wolves were playing without AD. So maybe it was all – we haven't seen the game, so maybe it was all worthless, and actually everything that we said was bad. But I assume we were spot on. Basically, you didn't have to watch the game. We just said what happened, and that's what's going to happen over the next stretch. He's Austin Case. I'm Shane Jackson. Thank you for listening for the Lakers Theory podcast. Make sure you're subscribed to us on all platforms. And we will be back possibly Thursday night, most likely Thursday night, assuming the Lakers win, but definitely over the weekend talking about both games as well. Once again, thank you for listening to the Lakers Theory podcast, and see you next time, Lakers fans.